Shut down that welfare birthday circus. These people don't belong in our park. Lieutenant Karen Doyle marches toward the gathering and overturns the entire birthday table. 9-year-old Jordan's Spider-Man cake explodes across the concrete, smashing food and presents everywhere. Look at all this food bought with taxpayer money while real Americans struggle. Parents scramble to shield their kids as Doyle boots chairs aside and rips down decorations. A joyful celebration becomes wreckage in moments. She locks on a tall black man hanging streamers. He turns slowly, fury barely contained, as he watches his son's big day destroyed. You the one behind this ghetto carnival, boy? Time you remembered your place. He stands motionless, hands trembling at the wreckage. One phone call will shatter everything these cops believe about power. 2 hours earlier, David Lawson had been the picture of a devoted dad, prepping the perfect birthday. He moved carefully around Druid Hill Park, checking every detail like someone who knew memories mattered. Red and blue streamers hung at precisely measured heights. The picnic tables formed a neat rectangle. Even each folding chair's position seemed calculated for maximum fun. Baby, you're being obsessed again, Renee called across the pavilion, teasing after 10 years of marriage. She arranged gift bags with their son's name in looping marker, but her eyes kept drifting toward her husband, constantly scanning their surroundings. David paused while hanging the Happy 9th Birthday Jordan banner, his gaze automatically sweeping the entrance, tree line, and parking lot. Old habits die hard, especially ones that kept him alive through 17 years in federal law enforcement. But today wasn't about Special Agent Lawson. Today he was just Dad. I just want everything perfect for Jordan, he said, adjusting the banner one last time. He's been talking about this party for weeks. Neighbors started arriving an hour earlier, and David knew each family by name. 8 months of carefully built normalcy forged those ties. Mrs. Green from 2 streets over, 75 and stiff with arthritis whenever humidity rose, still brought her famous potato salad to every cookout. The Taylor twins, whose father worked double shifts at the shipyard just to cover school clothes. Young Tiana's grandmother, Mrs. Robinson, baked the best cornbread in East Baltimore and never missed a community event despite fading eyesight. David had memorized their stories, struggles, and hopes. It wasn't just good cover for his undercover assignment, tracking Doyle's corruption ring. These people had become his people. He'd joined church services, hammered loose porch steps, driven elders to doctor visits. Every real moment of connection made his deception weigh heavier. Jordan burst from behind a tree where he'd been playing hide-and-seek with cousins, Spider-Man shirt already stained from honest 9-year-old chaos. He barreled into his father's legs, nearly knocking over the cooler packed with juice boxes. Dad, this is the best birthday ever! Jordan looked up with eyes full of unshakable trust that his father could fix anything. All my friends came. Mom made my favorite web cake, and you got all the Spider-Man decorations, and Mrs. Taylor brought those heavenly cookies. David knelt to his son's level, fighting that familiar tightness in his chest that came with living a double life. Every innocent question about his construction job felt like its own small betrayal. Every time Jordan proudly introduced him as my dad who builds important buildings, David felt the weight of one day explaining every lie. You deserve the best birthday, champ. You only turn 9 once, he said, ruffling Jordan's hair. Did you thank Mrs. Taylor for those cookies? Already did, and I helped Grandma Green set up her chair because her hands were hurting today, Jordan answered, beaming with the quiet pride of a kid raised to care about community. Even as he spoke, David's trained eye caught movement at the park entrance. His hand instinctively brushed his concealed badge, habit so ingrained he barely felt it. The FBI shield rested in his jacket pocket, beside his service weapon, and emergency beacon disguised as his wedding ring. 8 months of surveillance had documented Doyle's drug conspiracy, her calculated targeting of black neighborhoods, Her circle of dirty cops who treated badges like hunting licenses. David. Renee's voice carried a warning edge. Years of watching him come home from cases that left invisible scars taught her his micro-expressions. The slight jaw clench that meant his agent instincts were firing. The way his shoulders tightened when something felt off. Not today. Whatever you're thinking, not today. This is Jordan's day. He forced his muscles to loosen, forced himself into the moment. The surveillance photos on his phone could wait. Shots of Doyle taking cash-stuffed envelopes from known dealers. The recorded rants full of slurs and contempt could wait. Audio of her calling community barbecues, breeding grounds for criminals could wait. 8 months of pretending to be someone else could wait. Today was for Jordan and the neighbors who'd embraced them like family. "You're right," he said, pulling Renee close and kissing her forehead. She still smelled like the vanilla perfume from their college days, back when his biggest problem was passing criminology exams. Today I'm just Dad. But even as he said it, David couldn't shake the sense something was off. 8 months living among these streets, building relationships and tracking Baltimore's dirtiest police squad had sharpened his danger radar to something almost supernatural. The hair on his neck prickled without clear reason. Jordan tugged his hand, dragging him toward a cluster of kids begging to start the treasure hunt David had planned. He'd hidden Spider-Man stickers and little toys around the pavilion, mapping them out to keep the kids busy for at least an hour, while adults finally relaxed. As they crossed the grass, David's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced down without thinking, and felt his blood ice over. Message from his FBI handler. "Doyle's unit just got dispatched to your location. Anonymous noise complaint filed 20 minutes ago. This isn't random. Your cover might be blown. Abort if needed." Training slammed into place. He scanned the peaceful party, laughing kids hunting prizes, parents trading stories about school and rent, Renee arranging candles on the iced Spider-Man cake, and understood clearly they'd been set up. Someone inside Baltimore PD knew exactly who he was and where to hit him. Maybe Doyle herself. Maybe someone higher in the dirty chain. His cover was shredded, but his family stood here, surrounded by neighbors who trusted him to guard them. Folks who had no idea the man grilling burgers was a federal agent whose case could lock up dozens of cops. Distant sirens made the decision for him. David slid the phone away and walked toward his son, face calm despite the storm inside. "Jordan?" he called, voice steady despite the rising panic. "Come here, buddy." Before he reached him, 3 squad cars swung around the corner and rolled into the park with obvious aggressive intent. Lieutenant Karen Doyle had arrived to burn everything down. Doyle stepped from her cruiser like a predator closing on trapped prey. Her boots hit pavement with deliberate force, each step announcing claimed ownership. Officers Miller and Ortiz flanked her, palms resting on holstered guns despite facing a kid's birthday party. The trio crossed the grass with the strut of people who'd never been truly challenged. Well, what do we have here?" Doyle called, her voice slicing through the suddenly quiet pavilion. "Anonymous complaint about noise and an illegal gathering? Funny how you people always think rules don't apply to you." She swept her gaze over balloons, tables, families who'd been laughing moments ago. "This whole setup reeks of welfare fraud. Who paid for this food? Hard-working taxpayers, I'm guessing." Mrs. Green, 75 and retired after 42 years teaching Baltimore's children, pushed herself slowly from her folding chair. "Officer, this is just a kid's birthday party. We've got every right to be here." Doyle's eyes fixed on the elderly woman with hungry satisfaction. "Did I ask you to talk, Grandma? Park your welfare behind before you end up with real problems." The casual cruelty drew shocked gasps from several parents. David's jaw tightened, but he forced himself still beside the gift table. 8 months of surveillance had prepped him for Doyle's racism, but hearing it hurled at people he cared about landed like physical hits. Officer Miller drifted toward the food tables with obvious purpose. "Looks like a health code nightmare, Lieutenant. All this uncovered food cooking in the heat could be dangerous." "You're absolutely right, Miller. Public safety hazard, Doyle replied, eyeing the lovingly arranged buffet. Better dispose of it properly. Miller swept his arm across the main table, launching potato salad, fried chicken, and home-cooked sides onto the ground in a disgusting heap. Kids burst into tears as their birthday meal became trash smeared across concrete. Renee's careful Spider-Man cake hit the pavement with a wet splat. "Oops," Miller said with a grin. Accidents happen when you ignore food safety rules. Ortiz joined in, flipping the gift table. Wrapped presents exploded across the grass, paper ripping as toys tumbled out. Jordan's new soccer ball rolled toward the parking lot, followed by art kits and books relatives had sacrificed to buy. "This is what happens when Section 8 folks try to play fancy," Doyle announced. "Reality always reminds you where you actually belong." David stayed frozen, watching his son's milestone unravel. Every instinct screamed to flash his badge, end this with federal authority. But blowing his cover now could wreck 8 months of work, and let half the network slip away. Renee appeared beside him, fingers gripping his arm, feeling the tension radiating off him. "James, David," she whispered urgently, habit almost making her use his cover name. "Think about Jordan." But Doyle had already noticed his steadiness, his refusal to scatter. She moved toward him with the focus of a shark scenting blood. "You got something to say, boy?" she demanded, stopping inches from his face. "I see you standing all calm while everybody else shows proper fear. That makes me curious." David met her stare, voice carefully neutral. "Just trying to throw my son a birthday party, officer. No trouble here." "Your son?" Doyle's smile turned razor sharp. "So you're the mastermind behind this illegal bash? The one teaching these kids they can ignore authority?" She swept her arm toward the ruined party. Sobbing children, adults now filming even though they knew it might bring more heat later. "Look at this mess! Look at what you caused!" Ortiz slid behind David, tactical positioning no seasoned agent would miss. They were boxing him in, hoping to provoke a reaction they could frame as resistance. "We have every right to use this public park," David answered evenly. "We reserved this pavilion through the city." Doyle barked out a harsh laugh. "Reserved by who? With what money? Let me guess, some welfare hustle making taxpayers fund your little carnival." She slowly flipped open her citation book, milking the drama. "Unauthorized assembly, disturbing the peace, food safety violations. Should I keep going, or are you ready to admit the whole thing's a mistake?" Meanwhile, Miller found the small cooler where parents had stashed purses and keys. He dumped it out, scattering wallets, car keys, phones onto the ground. "Searching for contraband," he announced. "These parties always cover drug deals." "That's an illegal search without probable cause," Mr. Taylor called, the dad who worked 2 jobs to keep his family housed but never missed community meetings. "Probable cause?" Ortiz stepped into Taylor's space. "Your mouth just gave me probable cause, smart guy. Want your kids to watch you cuffed?" The humiliation campaign dragged on another 10 minutes. Doyle's crew stalked the families like occupying troops, demanding IDs, questioning immigration status, treating citizens like suspects in their own neighborhood. Elderly women dumped their purses. Teen boys got grilled about gangs. Every black man there was treated like he must be on parole. David watched, fists clenched at his sides, as Doyle's squad performed the same systematized racism he'd been secretly documenting for months. But this wasn't grainy surveillance or recorded audio. This was his son's birthday, his neighbor's, his wife. The breaking point came when Doyle refocused on him. "You know what bothers me about you?" she said, circling slowly. "You're too calm, too controlled. Most folks get nervous around real authority. You just stand there like you're on my level." She stopped so close he could smell stale coffee on her breath. "Time to teach you how this works." Doyle's predatory smile widened as she studied his composure. In 8 months of terrorizing this neighborhood, she'd learned to spot fear. The precise instant resistance collapsed, but this man's stillness felt dangerous, not defeated, and that enraged her. "What's wrong with you?" she snapped, stepping closer. Cat got your tongues, boy? I'm talking to you. David's training wrestled with his instinct as the performance escalated. Every part of him wanted to flash his real badge, watch her swagger evaporate. But dozens of cases depended on his cover. I'm listening, officer, he answered carefully, voice giving nothing away. Listening? Doyle's laugh cut like glass. Your kid's watching you be a coward. What kind of man lets this happen without a word? She gestured to the demolished celebration. Scattered toys, children sobbing into their parents' shoulders. Jordan stood frozen near the smashed cake, chocolate frosting splattered across his Spider-Man shirt, trying to process such cruelty. I asked you a question, boy! Doyle shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. Are you too dumb to answer when a real citizen addresses you? Miller slid behind David, Ortiz angling his flank, classic intimidation formation. Officer, I'm just trying to give my son a birthday, David said, jaw tight enough to crack teeth. We're not causing trouble. Not causing trouble? Doyle's tone turned theatrical. You took over a public park without permits. You created a health hazard with your food. You disturbed the peace, and you're disrespecting lawful authority. She yanked out her handcuffs, letting them dangle inches from his face. Maybe a little jail time will teach you how to address your betters. Renee stepped forward instinctively, protective instincts overriding fear. Please, officers, there's no need. We'll clean up and leave quietly. Doyle's eyes lit with fresh cruelty as she turned to Renee. Did I ask you to speak, sweetheart? Seems like this whole family has authority issues. Maybe you need lessons, too. Leave my wife alone, David said quietly, something in his tone sending Miller's hand toward his gun. Or what? Doyle crowded him again. You gonna do something? You think you're man enough to challenge real power? She looked around at the crowd, ensuring maximum audience. Everyone pay attention. This is what happens when folks forget their place. Doyle grabbed David's shoulder and shoved him toward his knees. Down where you belong. Show them what you really are. The federal agent in David calculated odds, assessed threats, measured tactics. But the father felt his 9-year-old watching him kneel. The neighbor saw people he loved witnessing his apparent helplessness. He lowered himself slowly, hands shaking with rage, not fear. That's better, Doyle announced. This is the natural order. Authority standing. Criminals kneeling. She started an exaggerated pat down, hands intentionally rough. When she reached his jacket, her fingers brushed the leather case holding his FBI credentials. Well, what do we have? She pulled out the case, flipping it open. David's heart stalled. 8 months of cover balanced on this moment. She stared at the gold FBI shield, then burst out laughing. Look at this pathetic mess, she crowed. This clown's got a fake FBI badge. Probably ordered it online to impress his welfare girlfriend. She tossed the case into the dirt near the ruined cake. Authentic credentials landing in frosting and grass. Fake badge possession. That's another felony. Miller and Ortiz laughed. Probably thinks he's in a movie, Miller sneered. Maybe we should call the real FBI. Ortiz added. Report a wannabe federal agent. That's serious. Doyle ground her heel into the case, twisting. Stop pretending you're important. You're just another unemployed baby daddy living off handouts. Jordan had been watching everything, distress building. His father, the strongest person he knew, forced to kneel while strangers mocked him. He couldn't grasp undercover work or federal jurisdiction. He only knew bad people were hurting Dad. Leave my dad alone, Jordan yelled, sprinting toward them. Renee grabbed him, wrapping both arms around him as he struggled. Jordan, no, stay with me, she pleaded. Doyle's attention snapped to the crying boy, cruelty sharpening. Control your little criminal, or I will. Maybe foster care would teach him respect. Don't you ever threaten my child, David said from his knees, steel finally entering his voice. Threaten? Doyle's smile turned reptilian. I don't threaten, boy. I promise. Your whole family's about to learn what happens when you cross the badge. She raised her radio, performing for the crowd. Dispatch Unit 23. I need child services for a welfare check. Suspected neglect and endangerment. Parents appear under the influence, creating an unsafe environment. The lie rolled off her tongue, practiced and effortless. David realized this wasn't new. It was routine. How many families had she broken like this? How many kids torn away on fabricated grounds? "You can't do that," Renee pleaded. "We haven't done anything." "I can do anything I want," Doyle replied, absolute confidence in her voice. "I am the law here, and the law says your family doesn't belong in decent society." She keyed her radio again. "Also requesting backup for multiple arrests, disorderly conduct, resisting authority, impersonating a federal officer, and whatever else I feel like." David stayed kneeling, genuine badge ground into the dirt, son crying in his wife's arms, community stunned. The lieutenant who'd brutalized neighborhoods for years didn't know she was seconds from facing federal consequences. But not yet. Not until his people were safe from retaliation. For now, David Lawson knelt and let her believe she held all the power. Additional sirens grew louder as backup rolled in. 2 more cruisers pulled up, officers spilling out with the easy swagger of predators who'd never been checked. The birthday party had become a scene of organized terror. Families huddled together while children watched uniforms destroy everything they'd built. "Shut this down," Doyle ordered. "Illegal assembly, health violations, noise disturbance. I want every adult identified and processed." Miller kicked over the remaining chairs with deliberate malice. "Tear down these decorations too, Lieutenant. Looks like a fire hazard." "Absolutely. Public safety first." Doyle smirked as Miller ripped streamers and stomped balloons. The cheerful decorations David had hung with care turned into shredded trash. Ortiz found the cooler holding party favors and dumped it, toys and candy bouncing across concrete. "Contraband check," he said. "These gatherings always hide something." Mrs. Green, still sitting despite earlier threats, spoke with the dignity of someone who'd survived decades of institutional racism. "You have no right to do this. This is a lawful gathering in public space." "Right," Doyle snapped, whirling toward her. "You think you have rights? Think your benefit checks came with constitutional protections?" She advanced on the folding chair, towering over the older woman. "Stand up when I'm talking to you, Grandma. Show some respect for real authority." "She has arthritis," Renee protested, still clutching Jordan. "She can barely stand without help." "Did I ask for your medical opinion?" Doyle shouted, making more kids cry. "I said up, now!" Mrs. Green struggled upright, joints protesting. Her unbroken posture made the cruelty sharper. "That's better," Doyle said. "See how civilized things look when everyone remembers their place." The new officers shredded what remained of the party. They overturned the last gift table, grinding presents into dirt. One officer found Jordan's new bike, the surprise David and Renee had saved months for, and kicked the front wheel until it bent. "Abandoned property," he declared. "Public hazard." From his knees, David watched his son's birthday dreams erased. The photos on his phone showed Doyle taking drug cash. The recorded conversations proved her racist schemes. 8 months of evidence could lock her away for years. None of that mattered while she terrorized his family. "You know what I think?" Doyle said, returning to him, badge case half buried in chocolate beside him. "I think you're not nearly sorry enough for your little stunt." She waved at the wrecked party. "All this could have been avoided if you'd just followed the rules. But you people always think they don't apply." Miller drifted closer to Renee and Jordan, just inside their space. "Kid's got a mouth," he remarked. "Been talking back all day. Maybe time away from bad influences would fix him." The threat was precise and calculated. Renee's grip on Jordan tightened. "You stay away from my child." "Or what?" Ortiz stepped closer. "You'll file a complaint? Hire a lawyer. Who'll they believe, decorated officers or welfare criminals?" Doyle dangled the cuffs inches from David's face again. "I'm thinking obstruction, resisting, impersonating a federal officer. That's what, 5 years, Miller?" "At least," Miller answered eagerly. "Please," Renee begged. "Let us clean up and leave. We'll never come back. Just leave us alone." "Too late," Doyle said, savoring it. "Your husband chose to challenge me. Now everyone watches what happens." She yanked David up, then shoved him down harder. His knees slammed concrete, tearing his jeans, but his expression barely shifted. 10 years of marriage had taught Renee his subtle tells, and what she saw scared her more than the cops. David was calculating, planning, preparing for something decisive. "David," she said urgently, recognizing that deadly calm. "Don't think about Jordan. Think about the fallout." But Doyle had decided to escalate. She grabbed Jordan's arm, ripping the boy from his mother despite his terrified sobs. "Maybe sometime in the system will teach this little punk respect," she announced, loud enough for everyone. Child services love cases like this. Neglectful parents, bad environment, obvious criminal influence. Jordan fought, tears streaming as he reached for his father. "Dad, help me! Make her stop!" His son's terrified cry shattered David's restraint. Protocols, cover stories, months of groundwork, evaporated in an instant. A corrupt cop had her hands on his child. David rose from his knees with controlled, lethal grace. Movement so precise, Miller flinched. The mild-mannered neighbor vanished, replaced by someone radiating dangerous focus. "Take your hands off my son," he said quietly, voice carrying absolute command. Doyle's cruel grin faltered, though her grip stayed firm. "What did you say to me?" "I said, take your hands off my son," David repeated, voice like ice. "Now." "Or what?" she fired back, bravado cracking. "You gonna hit a cop in front of everyone?" David slid a hand into his jacket with deliberate calm, movements making officers tense. Instead of a weapon, he pulled his phone. "No," he said, eyes never leaving hers while speed-dialing a number he knew cold. "I'm going to make a phone call." Doyle laughed sharply. "To who? Your lawyer? Some protest group?" The line picked up on the first ring. "This is the Special Agent David Lawson, badge number 3492, he said clearly, voice carrying across the pavilion. "I need immediate federal backup at Druid Hill Park, Baltimore. My cover's blown, and my family's under threat from corrupt Baltimore PD officers." The effect was instant. Doyle's hand slackened around Jordan as confusion and fear flickered. Miller and Ortiz traded panicked looks. Federal investigation into Lieutenant Karen Doyle's narcotics conspiracy has been running 8 months, David continued. "I've documented civil rights violations, drug trafficking, and systematic corruption. Request immediate arrests and federal charges." Doyle's complexion drained as disbelief, anger, and real fear fought across her face. "You're lying," she said weakly. "That badge is fake. You're just some welfare rat talking tough." David pocketed the phone and stooped to pick up his credentials, wiping frosting from the gold shield before raising it high. 8 months, he said conversationally. 8 months watching you brutalize families. 8 months logging every crime. 8 months waiting until I had enough to bury your whole unit. Helicopters roared closer, sending debris spinning. "That would be my backup," he said calmly. "I'd suggest releasing my son and backing away." Cornered, Doyle made one last catastrophic choice. Instead of releasing Jordan, she pulled him tighter, fingers drifting toward her gun. "Nobody moves until I know what's going on," she snarled. Helicopters thundered overhead now, and David's smile turned cold. "Lieutenant Karen Doyle," he said with total authority. "You're under arrest." The chopper's roar drowned crying kids and frantic whispers. Doyle's face went ghost white as she looked up at the circling aircraft, her swagger collapsing into panic. "You're bluffing," she insisted, voice cracking. "This is some trick." David straightened fully, posture transformed. The submissive neighbor vanished, replaced by a veteran federal agent. "Lieutenant Karen Doyle, badge number 44719, 25 years on Baltimore PD, he recited like reading from a file. Currently assigned Eastern District. Residence at 22892 Oakwood Drive with your estranged wife, Linda, and daughter Hannah, sophomore at Towson University." Doyle's grip on Jordan slipped as shock hit. "How do you know that?" 8 months of federal surveillance, David replied, "including recordings of you calling this neighborhood animals needing control, wires catching you coordinating with dealer Curtis Lane to protect his corners for monthly cash, financial records showing $200,000 in unexplained income over 3 years. Miller and Ortiz stood mute, bravado gone as reality sank in. They'd just trashed a federal agent's kid's party on dozens of cameras. "Sir," Miller stammered, suddenly small. We didn't know. We were following orders." David didn't look away from Doyle as he answered. "Same excuse for 8 months of terror, right? Same excuse when you planted drugs on 17-year-old Malik Harris last month. Same excuse when you stole 40 grand from the Rodriguez family's house and claimed it was drug cash." The helicopters hovered overhead as FBI tactical teams fast-roped into the park with military precision, black uniforms and rifles jarring against the scattered birthday decorations. "FBI, nobody move!" Agent Naomi Brooks, David's handler for the past 8 months, moved in with her weapon lowered but ready. She'd orchestrated the whole operation, watching her best undercover agent piece together Baltimore's ugliest police corruption case. "Agent Lawson," she called formally, establishing his status. "Report." Lieutenant Doyle and her squad just committed multiple federal crimes in front of roughly 30 witnesses, David replied, voice professional, almost detached. Civil rights violations, intimidation of a federal officer, property destruction, threats against a minor, all captured on multiple phones. Doyle finally released Jordan. He sprinted into Renee's arms as FBI agents surrounded the dirty cops. Doyle's face shifted from pale to ashen as the full picture landed. "This is impossible," she whispered. "You can't be FBI. You live here. You swing a hammer. I've seen you at neighborhood meetings." "Special Agent David Lawson," he said, holding up his credentials for everyone. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Public Corruption Unit, tasked with investigating systemic civil rights violations and drug corruption inside Baltimore PD." Agent Brooks stepped beside Doyle with handcuffs. "Lieutenant Karen Doyle, you're under arrest for violating federal civil rights statutes, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, extortion, and intimidating a federal officer." "Wait!" Doyle shouted, looking desperately at the families now filming with grim satisfaction. "This is entrapment. He pretended to be someone else. That's illegal." "Undercover work's perfectly legal when tracking active criminal conspiracies," David replied evenly. "Especially when those conspiracies revolve around stripping citizens of constitutional rights." Miller tried to edge away but found himself ringed by federal agents. I want to cooperate," he blurted. "I just followed Doyle. I can name others. Officer Ryan Miller." Agent Brooks announced, snapping cuffs on him. "You're also under arrest for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Cooperation can happen from federal custody." Ortiz stood silent, staring at David like he was seeing him for the first time. 8 months of casual bigotry. 8 months of treating him like less than human, all directed at a federal agent who'd recorded every insult, every hit, every scheme. "The fake badge," Ortiz said weakly. "The one we stomped, that was real." David bent, retrieved his case, and brushed away remaining frosting. "Special Agent David Lawson, badge 3492. The same badge you mocked for 10 minutes while wrecking a child's party." The arrests moved quickly. Agents read Miranda rights while neighbors kept filming, determined to chronicle Doyle's downfall as thoroughly as their own abuse. The woman who'd spent years terrorizing families now faced the cameras, cuffed and headed toward federal court. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Brooks recited, securing restraints. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." Doyle's last defiance was spitting near David's shoes. "This isn't over," she snarled. "You think one arrest changes anything? There are dozens of us. The whole system protects cops, not people like you." David regarded her almost with pity. "Lieutenant, you don't get it. This isn't one arrest. It's the opening move in Maryland's largest police corruption case." He showed her his phone, dozens of photos, recordings, financial documents. 34 officers are being arrested across the city right now. Your entire network is done." As agents marched Doyle and her crew away, the ruined party fell silent. Neighbors who'd endured their reign for years watched their tormentors finally face justice. Jordan tugged his father's hand, eyes puzzled. "Dad, are you really a policeman?" David knelt, finally free to tell the truth. "I'm an FBI agent, buddy. My job is catching bad cops who hurt good people." Overhead, news choppers joined FBI aircraft. Within minutes, the story would outgrow this shattered birthday and explode into something national. The birthday party scandal turned out to be just the visible tip of something monstrous beneath the surface. Within hours, global outlets picked it up. BBC aired US police corruption exposed at child's birthday, while German networks framed it as proof of systemic racism. The clip of a federal agent on his knees in the dirt while dirty cops mocked his badge became a worldwide emblem of institutional collapse. By sunset, demonstrators clustered outside Baltimore police headquarters, outrage boiling over into organized resistance. The crowd mixed long-time neighborhood residents brutalized for years with suburban supporters who'd driven in after watching the viral footage. Posters reading "Know Your Place, Prison" and "FBI Agent Dad" waved beside smaller clusters of counter-protesters clutching "Back the Blue" flags. The generational split was painful and obvious. Older neighbors who'd endured decades of harassment sobbed openly watching Lieutenant Doyle hauled off in cuffs. Younger activists streamed everything on their phones, splicing new roast videos about the arrested officers before the night ended. Kids who'd been at Jordan's ruined party drew pictures of FBI helicopters and proudly told reporters about their undercover, secret agent neighbor. By prime time, national news had turned the story into wall-to-wall content, filling every cable panel with fiery debate. Split screens showed the arrest from multiple angles, while experts argued about police accountability, federal oversight, and whether undercover operations in black neighborhoods were justice tools or another form of surveillance. Overnight, David went from anonymous neighbor to reluctant symbol. "This reaches far beyond Baltimore," declared a CNN legal analyst. "This investigation proves federal agents can infiltrate and methodically expose entrenched police corruption. It's a template other departments could use nationwide." Over on a conservative network, the narrative twisted hard. Federal agents living undercover for months, secretly recording law-abiding citizens and trapping local officers. Viewers were asked if this was the future they wanted. The partisan split played out in real time online. Progressive accounts posted supercuts of Doyle's racist rants with captions celebrating her downfall. Right-leaning users pushed chopped clips of David revealing his badge, attacking him as a sneaky Fed who betrayed trust. Lost under the noise was the real heart of it all. A 9-year-old whose party got smashed by uniformed bullies, and a father who'd spent 8 months genuinely loving a community he secretly knew he'd one day shock. Renee watched the digital hurricane from a secure FBI safe house, where agents had moved them after the arrest. "Look at this," she said, showing David her phone. "People are calling you the birthday party FBI agent. Somebody turned your speech into a meme." The graphic showed David holding his badge over a backdrop of cake and helicopters, captioned, "Special Agent David Lawson Badge 3492. Variations in multiple languages already racked up millions of shares." "I never wanted to be famous," David muttered, watching Jordan play tag with bored agents who'd volunteered to entertain him while the adults processed their shattered normal. "I just wanted to put bad cops away and go home." "Looks like you did more than that," Renee replied, scrolling through hundreds of messages from neighbors pouring out gratitude and affection for their secret protector. "You gave folks something they haven't had in a long time. Real hope." 3 days later, Special Agent Naomi Brooks stood in front of the largest evidence spread she'd ever overseen. The Baltimore FBI conference room looked like a conspiracy board brought to life. Red string connecting photos, bank records, transcripts, surveillance stills. 8 months of David's undercover work had produced enough paper and pixels to rattle the entire power structure of Baltimore policing. 34 officers, Brooks told the assembled prosecutors and Justice Department lawyers. 34 sworn cops operating as a criminal crew. She tapped the first slide. Lieutenant Karen Doyle's photo appeared next to a jaw-dropping financial chart, drawing low whistles from several attorneys. Doyle alone skimmed more than $200,000 from drug profits in 3 years. But she wasn't the top. She was middle management in a racket that reached all the way to the deputy chief's office. Tech specialist agent Miguel Alvarez fired up the audio system. "We've got 8 months of conversations, thanks to Lawson wearing wires everywhere they felt safe. Barbecues, church events, stoop talks. If they thought it was private, he was recording." The first clip, captured at a noisy block party months earlier, came through crystal clear. Doyle's voice oozed casual hate that made some lawyers shift uneasily. "These animals need reminders who runs this city," she sneered. "Any gathering could turn into a riot. Better to crush them before they start organizing." That cookout, Brooks explained, was celebrating a local teen's acceptance to a state university. David attended as the friendly neighbor while documenting an explicit strategy to sabotage legitimate community celebrations. U.S. Attorney Monica Reynolds leaned forward, eyes sharp. "What's the scale here? How many events did they hit?" Alvarez scanned his tablet. 47 documented disruptions in 8 months. Birthdays, graduations, church fundraisers, youth leagues. The pattern is intentional. They targeted anything that might build trust, pride, or solidarity. Then came the clip that truly showed how high this ran. Deputy Chief Alan Mercer's voice, captured during a private restaurant meeting with Doyle, revealed the conspiracy's brain. "Federal heat's rising," Mercer said. "Civil rights groups keep filing complaints. We need smarter optics. On paper, everything has to look justified." "And if they push back?" Doyle asked. "Then we push them into the system," Mercer replied. "Bury them in charges, fees, court dates. Turn them into examples. Fear works better than bullets." The room went silent as the words sank in. This wasn't random racism or a few bad apples. It was a deliberate blueprint for oppression, engineered at the highest levels. Financial crimes specialist Caroline Pierce stepped up next, projecting banking records that mapped out corruption bigger than anyone expected. "The drug money didn't just pad individual pockets," she said. "A cut ran through the police union's accounts, then into campaign chests for judges and prosecutors likely to favor police narratives." "They were essentially purchasing the justice system?" asked DOJ lawyer Daniel Cho. "More accurately, they were rigging it," Pierce answered. "We've traced donations from laundered funds to at least 6 local judges, each with suspiciously pro-police rulings in complaint cases. The conspiracy wrapped law enforcement, courts, and politics into one machine." Cho clicked through surveillance photos taken by David. Shots showed Doyle and other officers meeting openly with known dealers, exchanging envelopes, coordinating turf like corporate executives carving up markets. Agent Lawson documented regular strategy sessions, Cho explained. The cops weren't just taking bribes, they were active partners in distribution, using their badges to remove rivals and shield preferred suppliers. One photo captured Doyle shaking hands with heroin dealer Curtis Lane outside a warehouse hub, both smiling comfortably. Lane's crew paid $15,000 a month for police protection, advance raid warnings, selective enforcement, and safe passage for large shipments, Alvarez said. "We've got recorded calls laying out those terms going back several years." The next evidence hit even harder. Brooks projected internal PD messages that showed deliberate targeting of community organizers. "They kept watch lists," she said grimly. "Pastors, parent advocates, neighborhood leaders, anyone who might rally resistance. Those names were flagged for harassment, bogus charges, and intimidation campaigns." David Lawson's alias appeared on one list with a red notation. "Possible federal interest. Monitor." The date was 6 months before the birthday party, proving someone suspected him long before. "Lawson operated with compromised cover for months," Brooks said. "They slowly escalated pressure, testing him. The birthday party was a designed breaking point to force him to either show his hand or let his family be crushed." Reynolds studied the boards, eyes blazing. "This isn't just corruption. This is RICO. We're looking at an ongoing criminal enterprise using government authority to run drugs and terrorize neighborhoods." "Exactly," Brooks replied. "We're filing racketeering charges alongside civil rights counts. Top players could see 2 to 3 decades in federal time, but it went wider. Deeper analysis showed the model spreading beyond Baltimore city lines, linked to similar setups in 3 surrounding jurisdictions. They were exporting their playbook, Pierce said, teaching other departments how to build protection partnerships with dealers while keeping official records clean. We've identified around 40 additional officers in nearby counties who attended informal community management trainings. At that point, David walked in for his first full briefing since his cover exploded, still looking drained from 3 straight days of debriefs. His undercover performance was so convincing some neighbors had refused to accept he was federal, insisting he'd been framed to protect crooked cops. "The personal cost has been huge," he told the room quietly. "My son wants to know why I lied. My neighbors feel like I betrayed them. People who poured their fears about police into my ear now worry I gathered intel to use against them. But they also understand why it had to be done," Brooks added. "Community leaders keep calling. They're thanking Agent Lawson for 8 months of real protection while he built this case." David pulled out his phone and played a voicemail he'd saved. Mrs. Green's familiar, steady voice filled the room. "David, baby, this is Mrs. Green. Every Sunday you sat in church with us. Every time you fixed my steps. Every talk we had about keeping our grandbabies safe, that was real. The job was pretend. The man wasn't. That man is this neighborhood's hero." Several lawyers cleared their throats, blinking faster than usual. Undercover work's emotional toll suddenly had a face. "Our evidence package includes over 2,000 hours of recordings, 15,000 images, complete financials for all 34 officers, and testimony from 47 residents," Alvarez summarized. "Most importantly," Brooks added, "we've got real-time civil rights violations that normally vanish into," he said, she said. "Lawson's 8-month presence lets us prove pattern and practice, not isolated incidents." The restaurant recordings were especially damning, officers talking freely about their contempt. One clip captured Doyle and 3 colleagues discussing community parties like they were insurgent meetings. "These people multiply like rabbits and expect us to fund their little celebrations," Doyle scoffed. "Better to shut that down before they turn political. Keep them scared, divided, and scrambling to survive so they don't have energy for resistance." "That's a textbook civil rights conspiracy," Cho said. "They're literally planning to use police power to suppress First Amendment activity." And then came the money trail. Over 5 years, the operation generated over $8 million in drug-linked income, laundered through union accounts, PACs, and businesses owned by relatives. "They weren't just pocketing bribes," Pierce said. "This was a sophisticated criminal syndicate using uniforms as cover." The harm to neighborhoods was just as staggering. Brooks pulled up statistics charting deliberate damage. 47 disrupted events in 8 months, 138 bogus arrests of community leaders over 3 years, more than 300,000 in legal bills forced on working families. "This wasn't tough policing," she said. "It was targeted social destruction. Every conversation I recorded, every picture I took, every deposit slip I copied happened because they truly believed nothing could touch them," David said quietly. "Their confidence came from institutional shielding," Brooks added. "Internal Affairs dumped 90+% of complaints. The union defended even obvious criminal acts. Prosecutors took police testimony as gospel, even when physical evidence screamed otherwise." Reynolds rose, addressing the room. "This is exactly why federal civil rights enforcement exists. When local systems rot past self-correction, federal power has to step in to defend the Constitution." She gestured toward the walls flooded with evidence. "We're not just charging crimes. We're dismantling an organization that used state authority to terrorize citizens. That birthday party everyone saw online, that was one afternoon in 8 months of recorded abuse. The only difference that day was simple. A victim finally had federal power in his back pocket." As the briefing wrapped, agents fanned out. They prepared warrants for the remaining conspirators. The 3 arrests at the park were just an opening shot. Over the next 2 days, federal teams would scoop up 31 more Baltimore officers in the biggest corruption sweep the state had ever seen. David gathered his files, bracing for more testimony, more grand jury hours, more retellings. 8 months undercover would now stretch into years of courtroom work to make sure every badge that terrorized families answered in federal court. "Agent Lawson," Reynolds called as he headed for the door. "Understand this. Your sacrifice, and your families, is going to save lives and restore rights for thousands." David looked back at the evidence-covered walls and gave a tired, grim smile. "Ma'am, that party was supposed to end my assignment," he said. "Turns out, it was just the start of justice." 6 weeks after the world watched the birthday footage, prosecutors were deep into building the most expansive corruption case in Maryland history. The federal grand jury room hummed with tension as witnesses cycled in, lining up to tell their stories about years under Doyle's crew. The most devastating voice, though, came from someone wearing a badge himself. Officer Victor Rodriguez, 15-year Baltimore veteran. He sat across from Reynolds in a secure interview room, hands trembling as he opened a folder stuffed with evidence he'd quietly gathered for 2 years. His career was finished, pension gone, his family getting threats. But his conscience had finally snapped. "I couldn't unsee what they did to that family," Rodriguez began hoarsely. "That little boy screaming over his crushed cake while Doyle laughed. That federal agent on his knees being called boy. My kids are around that age. I broke." Reynolds hit record as Rodriguez placed his first device on the table, a small digital recorder he'd used to capture internal briefings and backroom conversations. "I started taping after they roughed up my nephew," he said. "Miguel was driving home from the hospital. He's a respiratory therapist, saves lives every day. They pulled him over for existing in his own neighborhood. The first file he played was brutal. Doyle and Deputy Chief Mercer discussed community strategy, like battlefield commanders planning occupation tactics. We've got to crush their spirit before they organize," Doyle said. "Birthdays, graduations, church things. Those are chances to remind them who's in charge." "Make it look random," Mercer replied. "Individual responses to complaints, nothing pattern-based. No trail civil rights lawyers can follow, but thorough enough that nobody ever feels safe gathering." Reynolds paused the recording, studying Rodriguez's stricken face. "How long had this been going on?" "At least 8 years, I can prove," he answered. "Older guys say early 2000s, maybe longer." The unofficial playbook came into focus as Rodriguez shared more. Doyle's unit had built a harassment manual. They scanned social media for upcoming events, phoned in fake noise complaints, coordinated with friendly dispatchers for fast responses. He said. They called it community management. Translation, break up anything that might strengthen bonds or spark organizing. Birthdays, block parties, church cookouts. If it brought people together positively, it went on their hit list. One especially damning tape captured Doyle training rookies during lineup, Rodriguez's recorder hidden nearby. "The goal isn't arrests," Doyle lectured. "Arrests mean reports and lawyers. The goal is humiliation. Make parents look powerless. Make kids lose faith in them. Tear down the structures that could challenge us." Reynolds leaned forward, stunned. They were intentionally shredding social cohesion as an unofficial mission. "Officially unsanctioned, systematically enforced," Rodriguez clarified. "Nothing written down, but everyone understood. We weren't protect and serve, we were control and intimidate." His financial evidence was just as explosive. He'd snapped deposit slips, recorded money split conversations, even secretly filmed meetups between officers and dealers. The cash flow map showed how loyalty was bought and enforced. "Doyle wasn't the top," Rodriguez explained. "She answered to Mercer, and Mercer hinted he answered to someone above him, maybe the commissioner's circle. I heard references but never got close enough to record those calls. What he did have was overwhelming." Rodriguez compiled a list of more than 200 community events Doyle's squad disrupted over 5 years. Birthdays, graduations, fundraisers, Little League tournaments. If it made the neighborhood feel alive, it ended under sirens and threats. "They kept score," he said bitterly. He showed Reynolds a notebook where Doyle tracked monthly interventions like sales numbers. Her record was 37 disrupted gatherings in 4 weeks, and she bragged about it. Even worse were their notes on individual leaders. Rodriguez had recordings of strategy sessions. They had files on pastors, PTA moms, organizers, anyone with a voice, he said. The plan was either scare them onto our side or bury them under charges until no one listened. David's name appeared on one of those lists. They flagged him months before the party, Rodriguez admitted. Smart, respected, wouldn't scare easy. They assumed he was DEA or ATF poking into drug money. They never guessed he was documenting their civil rights abuses. The birthday raid was a deliberate crucible. Orders were clear. Keep cranking up humiliation until he snapped. The endgame was to arrest him in front of his kid, break him completely, then offer to drop everything if he snitched on neighbors. They wanted to flip him against the community. Reynolds digested the mountain of material. Recordings, ledgers, screenshots, photos. Officer Rodriguez? She asked quietly. Why now? Why risk everything? Rodriguez's eyes filled. Because I watched Lawson eat humiliation to protect his case, he said, letting them degrade him in front of his son. If he could sacrifice 8 months for strangers, I could sacrifice my career. Neighborhood reaction to Rodriguez was complicated. Some saw him as too late to the fight. Others understood that without his insider proof, convictions might crumble. The community needs truth before it can heal, Rodriguez insisted. Real truth about how organized this was, how far it reached. People need to see this wasn't one bad unit. It was policy in everything but name. A week later, Reynolds took Rodriguez's evidence before the grand jury. 23 citizens from across Maryland sat through hours of chilling audio, mountains of documents, and personal stories from 47 residents brutalized under the scheme. Their verdict came fast and heavy. 97 federal felony counts were handed down, against 34 officers, 3 judges, 2 prosecutors, and 5 civilians who laundered drug money. Charges ranged from civil rights conspiracies to racketeering, trafficking, and obstruction. Equally important, Rodriguez's files gave a blueprint to prevent future rot. The meticulous documentation of harassment tactics, institutional shielding, and political cover would inform federal reforms for years. Jordan Lawson, now 10, had asked to speak to the grand jury himself. Prosecutors hesitated, but his parents backed his choice. The bad police made my dad kneel in the dirt on my birthday, Jordan told them, voice steady despite the weight. But my dad was a good police the whole time, protecting everybody. The bad ones didn't know good always wins. Jurors later said that short testimony hit harder than any legal argument. It reminded them who this was for, kids just wanting safe birthdays. Outside, community leaders held prayer circles every day the grand jury met. Mrs. Green, recovering from hip surgery, showed up daily in her wheelchair, clutching a sign reading, "Justice for all our children." Agent Lawson lived with us 8 months, she told reporters. Ate our food, played with our grandbabies. He could have shut them down on day 1. Instead, he stayed long enough to change everything. That's love in action. By the time indictments finished, prosecutors had filled 47 boxes with evidence. Recordings, photos, bank trails, emails, sworn statements. The portrait of systemic corruption was undeniable. Deputy Chief Mercer resigned the day before his scheduled grand jury testimony, citing health reasons. His statement mentioned nothing about looming federal charges or the neighborhoods he'd helped terrorize. Doyle stayed combative. Her lawyer filed motions screaming, "Selective prosecution," and federal overreach, insisting Washington had no business judging local tactics. Federal judges tossed the motions almost immediately. The pattern of civil rights violations was too blatant to spin. Rodriguez's cooperation cracked the wall of silence. More officers came forward, trading testimony for lighter time. Witnesses who'd stayed quiet from fear now found bravery in numbers. For the first time, families believed telling their stories might actually matter. The truth poured out, uglier than anyone predicted. What started with one shredded birthday spread exposed a decade of rot in the nation's 8th largest city. Justice was no longer a wish. It was a wave that couldn't be stopped. The Baltimore federal courthouse had never seen crowds like the ones that gathered 3 months after the arrest. Inside, U.S. Attorney Reynolds faced a packed courtroom and a forest of cameras to announce the end of the historic prosecutions. Outside, residents filled the plaza, waving signs demanding not just punishment, but lasting accountability. "Today is a reckoning," Reynolds began, her voice echoing. 97 federal felony convictions, 34 officers, 3 judges, 2 prosecutors, 5 civilian launderers. Crimes ranging from civil rights conspiracies to racketeering. At the defense table, former Lieutenant Doyle sat in an orange jumpsuit, swagger replaced by a hollow stare. The woman who'd strutted through neighborhoods now awaited a sentence that would outlast her prime. Her lawyer had coached contrition, but her jaw stayed clenched, eyes hard. Judge Elena Morales, a seasoned federal jurist brought in from another circuit, reviewed the mountain of sentencing memos. At 64, she'd seen plenty, but this case still shocked her. "Lieutenant Doyle," Judge Morales began, voice steady but heavy, "you stand convicted of conspiracy to violate civil rights, racketeering, drug trafficking conspiracy, and obstruction. Before I sentence you, you will hear exactly what you did to this city." She gestured toward the packed gallery. Dozens of Doyle's victims sat shoulder to shoulder. Jordan, now 10, sat in the front row between his parents, wearing a small suit and clutching a new drawing. Birthday cake and helicopters together this time. "You terrorized a federal agent and traumatized his child on what should have been one of the happiest days of his life," the judge said. "And that was just one day in a years-long campaign of oppression." David rose for his impact statement. 8 months undercover, then months on the stand had aged him, but his voice didn't waver. "Lieutenant Doyle, you called my son's birthday a ghetto circus," he began. "You forced me onto my knees in front of my child and called me boy. You stomped my real badge into the dirt and laughed." He held her gaze even as she looked away. "But the worst part isn't what you did to my family. It's realizing you'd been doing it to countless families with no recourse. Folks with no federal shield, no backup helicopters, no cameras watching. You turned their joy into trauma and walked away smirking." Doyle's hands shook faintly, but her face stayed stone. "You asked what kind of man I am," Lawson continued. "I'm the kind who spent 8 months in a community, protecting people I grew to love while documenting every crime you committed. The kind who let himself be humiliated so justice would stick." He turned back to the bench. "Your Honor, Doyle symbolizes everything broken in policing, using a badge as a weapon, turning public service into private profit, treating citizens as enemies." Mrs. Green struggled upright with her walker when it was her turn, the room falling silent. "That woman ruined my grandson's medical school celebration," she said, her voice laced with age and iron. "Called our party a gang meeting. Made my boy lie on concrete while she searched him for guns he never had." She pointed a trembling finger at Doyle. "You tried to crush our spirits, to make us scared of cheering for our children. But we're still here, our babies are still succeeding, and your terror reign is finished." Victim after victim stepped up. Parents whose kids' birthdays had been raided. Pastors whose church events were stormed. Teens humiliated and cuffed for nothing. Small business owners shaken down for protection. Their accounts formed a mosaic of deliberate harm meant to choke community life. Renee spoke about the cost at home. "I watched my husband carry the weight of pretending to be powerless," she said. "I watched him wrestle with lying to people who trusted us, all while trying to keep our son safe. And I watched that boy relive his worst day over and over in videos and headlines. Yet the most piercing words came again from Jordan. He'd insisted on speaking, just like before, despite prosecutors' protective instincts. "The mean police lady broke my birthday," he said plainly. "She made my dad kneel and called him ugly names. She made me and my friends cry." He turned toward Doyle with the unfiltered honesty only kids possess. "But my dad was a hero the whole time. He pretended to be regular so he could catch the bad police and keep everybody safe. I'm proud of him for being brave." Doyle's lawyer begged for mercy, blaming department culture. Judge Morales was unmoved. "These weren't split-second decisions," she said. "They were deliberate, repeated choices to violate the Constitution, often with open enjoyment of the pain caused. She methodically reviewed the evidence, mocking recorded calls, luxury purchases, harassment stats. "Recordings show you relished degrading families," she said. "Bank records show you profited handsomely from drug operations. Testimony reveals targeted attacks on community events meant to destroy unity." The courtroom held its breath as she readied the sentence. "Sarah Doyle, you are sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without parole," Morales declared. "You are barred for life from any law enforcement role and ordered to pay $200,000 in restitution to community victims." Gasps, tears, and quiet cheers rippled through the room. Rage finally flashed across Doyle's face, not remorse, just fury at losing everything. Her attorney immediately vowed appeals, but everyone knew the evidence was ironclad. Sentences for her crew followed. Officer Miller, 18 years. Detective Ortiz, 15. Deputy Chief Mercer, 12, reduced only because he eventually cooperated. Every member of Doyle's squad received real time. Yet the reckoning wasn't just about individuals. Institutional reforms rolled out alongside the prison terms. Judge Morales announced a sweeping consent decree, placing Baltimore PD under long-term federal oversight, civilian review boards with teeth, and federal monitors empowered to examine internal communications. "This decree will last at least 10 years, she said. "Its purpose is simple: to ensure nothing like these abuses can root themselves here again." Outside, community organizers turned sentencing day into something else entirely: a celebration. Jordan cut a bright ribbon at a podium set up on the courthouse steps. "Today is Jordan's real birthday party," Mrs. Green announced into the mic, voice proud. "The party that should have happened months ago, before criminals in uniform destroyed it." Tables overflowed with the same foods once smeared across Druid Hill Park's concrete: potato salad, fried chicken, and a Spider-Man cake that matched the original down to the icing webs. This time, kids laughed freely under watchful eyes of newly reformed officers, providing security with genuine, not forced smiles. During the celebration, David was sworn in as the FBI's new Assistant Director for Community Relations, his promotion symbolizing a federal promise to rebuild trust instead of simply chasing headlines. His speech focused less on punishment than on what comes after. "Doyle's crew thought they were beyond reach," he told the crowd. "They believed badges gave them license to terrorize. Today proves nobody outranks the Constitution. When local systems collapse, federal authority will stand between families and abuse." Renee stepped up next to announce the launch of the Jordan Lawson Community Justice Foundation, funded partly by restitution from the very officers who'd once tormented their neighborhood. The foundation would bankroll legal help and organizing in communities facing similar harassment. "Our family paid a heavy price," she said. 8 months in hiding in plain sight, trauma from that birthday, ongoing security worries. But we paid it so other families won't have to endure what we did." Jordan spoke last, strangely composed. "The bad police tried to scare us," he said. "But when good people are brave, good wins. My dad was brave, Mrs. Green was brave, Mr. Rodriguez was brave. Now kids can have parties without being terrified." News outlets covered every second. Cable hosts debated oversight and reform rather than whether the crimes were real. Social media campaigns celebrated the sentences and demanded similar cleanups elsewhere. Foreign media pointed to the case as proof American institutions could still self-correct. Yet the community's reaction mattered most. A year after Doyle's sentencing, Druid Hill Park hosted its first Justice Day, featuring exactly the joyful gatherings her unit had once hunted. Families grilled, kids raced, music played, and no one watched the entrance nervously. Doyle began her 25-year bid at a federal facility in West Virginia, far from the city she'd abused. Reports said she still called herself a victim of political targeting, refusing to admit wrongdoing. She wouldn't be eligible for release until Jordan was grown. Meanwhile, the corruption web that strangled Baltimore policing for nearly a decade had been cut apart. Residents could gather without expecting flashing lights. Parents could dial 911 without fearing they'd become suspects. The reckoning was broad, public, and undeniable. The ruined birthdays became a lasting symbol, of resilience, resistance, and constitutional rights finally punching back. 2 years after Doyle's perp walk, Druid Hill Park buzzed with the same energy as that first party. But the atmosphere was transformed. The pavilion now carried a bronze plaque reading, "Lawson Community Justice Park." Officers on site, painted faces, and twisted balloon animals. Not because cameras were rolling, but because that's what neighbors do for each other. Jordan, now 11 and taller, stepped to a podium. 2 years ago, bad police came to my birthday and tried to scare everybody, he said, voice sure. They didn't know my dad was an FBI agent trying to protect us. They thought they could be mean and never face anything. He scanned the crowd of former victims, community leaders, federal officials, and new era officers. But good people fought back, and now kids can celebrate without fear. Now officers help with parties instead of destroying them. My dad calls that what justice looks like. Applause washed over him as he cut the ribbon on the new Jordan Lawson Community Justice Center. The facility would offer legal aid, know your rights training, and mediation services for neighborhoods across the city, a permanent front line against future abuse. Funding came from federal grants, restitution from convicted officials, and community fundraising that proved residents weren't waiting on saviors, they were investing in themselves. David, watching from the side, felt a pride deeper than any promotion. Jordan had stood up in rooms grown adults feared and told the truth. He'd become an emblem of what childhood courage could spark. Every day reminds me why this work matters, David told the crowd when his turn came. 2 years ago, my family saw the worst version of policing, he said. Today, we're witnessing what it can become when accountability and partnership lead the way. The new Baltimore PD barely resembled the old regime. Federal monitoring brought sweeping changes, body cams that couldn't mysteriously fail, independent boards with real subpoena power, officers required to attend community events as neighbors, not enforcers, and complaint systems that actually investigated instead of auto-shredding. Officer Jennifer Ruiz, a rookie from East Baltimore, moved through the crowd, chatting easily. She'd grown up on these blocks, graduated from local schools, and joined the force to help fix the damage people like Doyle had done. The old department looked at gatherings like this and saw threat, she told teens eyeing law enforcement careers. This department sees chances to connect. We're not occupying these streets anymore. We live here, same as you. Renee had turned her trauma into a vocation. As director of the Jordan Lawson Community Justice Foundation, she'd helped over 200 families navigate contacts with police, file complaints, and access legal support. Healing doesn't happen just because folks get locked up, she said. Communities need resources to rebuild. The Foundation's signature program paired families hurt by past policing with reform-minded officers committed to making amends. Rodriguez, now retired from the force, spent evenings coaching youth basketball and attending forums to answer hard questions. I spent 15 years on the wrong side, he told parents watching their kids scrimmage. The rest of my time is dedicated to fixing what I helped break. It doesn't erase history, but it honors the courage of families who demanded justice. Mrs. Green, 76 and unstoppable, became a sort of community grandmother at the center. She helped kids with homework, told stories about marching in the 60s, and reminded everyone that today's battles were part of a longer struggle. These parties feel like the freedom schools we ran back then, she told visitors touring an exhibit on the case. Back in Mississippi, we fought for voting and education. Now our babies fight to celebrate without harassment from supposed protectors. The display included photos from Jordan's first ruined birthday, snapshots from the investigation, and children's art about what safe policing looks like. One drawing showed helicopters lowering cake. Another showed officers and kids holding hands around a picnic table. Federal oversight in Baltimore became a national model. DOJ officials routinely brought delegations from other cities to see the results. Complaints down, trust up, positive interactions soaring. But for the Lawsons, the proof was simpler. Jordan could play in that park without flinching at sirens. As the video narrator's voice wrapped up online, viewers saw kids running, officers laughing with families, and that bronze plaque glinting in the sun. If this story of real accountability moved you, share it. Comment what should happen to abusers of power. Your voice helps justice echo. Lesson 1. Power without accountability destroys ordinary joy. If you are in your late 60s or 70s, you may remember when a child's birthday in the park was simple. Paper plates, a sheet cake from the grocery store, kids running under the trees. That is all David Lawson was trying to give his 9-year-old son. Nothing fancy, just a slice of ordinary American happiness. When Lieutenant Doyle and her crew stormed that picnic, smashing the Spider-Man cake into the concrete and sneering about a welfare circus, they weren't only ruining a party. They were sending a message many older Americans recognize from the days of fire hoses and dogs on black and white TV. When power is unchecked, it shows up in everyday places and small humiliations. A badge without accountability can turn a public park into enemy territory and a birthday table into a battlefield. All to remind the wrong families, you don't belong here. Lesson 2. Quiet courage can change the course of a city. The fireworks in this story are easy to spot. The helicopters, the FBI jackets, the fast roping teams. But if you have lived a long life, you know the real drama happened in the slow, quiet months before. For 8 months, David lived as the helpful construction worker, fixing Mrs. Green's porch, carrying chairs at church, memorizing every name and worry on that block, all while hiding a badge he could not show. Imagine the strength it took to kneel in the dirt, be called boy, hear his son plead, "Dad, help me," and still hold back, because blowing his cover too early would let an entire corrupt network slip away. Many seniors know that kind of courage, staying at a hard job to feed a family, standing up at a town meeting when your hands shook, telling the truth when it cost you friends. In the end, that steady bravery, joined with neighbors who testified, and an honest cop like Rodriguez who broke the code of silence, turned one ruined birthday into a turning point for a whole city. Lesson 3. Real justice means repairing the damage, not just jailing the guilty. Those of us with gray hair know that prison time alone does not heal a wound. Yes, there was real satisfaction in watching Doyle, Miller, and the others led away in cuffs, and hearing a federal judge bar them from ever wearing a badge again. But the deeper justice came afterward, in the careful repairs. It showed up in the new Spider-Man cake, cut at that same park under a bronze plaque honoring community courage. In Jordan, a little older now, telling the crowd that good wins when people are brave. In Mrs. Green, Walker and all, welcoming children into a justice center funded by the very officers who once terrorized them. And in a police department forced under tough federal oversight, with cameras that cannot be quietly switched off and real civilian boards reading the numbers. For grandparents wondering what kind of country their grandchildren will inherit, this story offers a hard but hopeful truth. Justice may come late and at a cost, but when courage, truth, and community stay stubborn, it can still arrive in time to change the ending. Friends, after walking through David Lawson's undercover sacrifice, that ruined birthday, and the long road toward real reform, I'd love to hear from you. Do stories like this make you feel our system can still correct itself when brave people step up? Or do you think we need deeper change than what we saw here? Have you ever witnessed, or personally lived through, a moment when ordinary folks stood up to abuse of power and something actually changed? Please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and share your story in the comments so we can keep learning and growing together.